knowledge from various sources, bring them together, fuse them, augment them in a way that you can make better decisions both at the discovery level and at the operational level. So should we call AI and ML as artificial intelligence and machine learning or augmented intelligence and machine learning? This is something that I want you to think about. How do we bring physics-based knowledge? And given the current state of the art, there is, a lot of activity happening as we speak over the last couple of years, where they talk about physics-inspired AI or physics-inspired neural networks, physics-inspired reasoning, so on. So, given this, augmented intelligence is something that would I would think add a lot of value for sure. But more importantly, is an interesting area for to research, and that's something I would like to just walk you through some of my research in this area. Okay. So the question is, can we do more? And so let me begin by giving you a simple example and clearly place together where ML comes, where AI comes, and where AI and ML as understood as augmented intelligence comes up. Okay. And this is an example that spans across domains. Everybody can understand this example. This is basically a combustion example where fuel is fired, there is a flame, and these flame, for instance, if it's a um, power generation application, then this flame will impinge on the boiler tubes, and then you have steam generated. Steam goes and drives a prime mover or a turbine, and you generate power. So in this very simple application, you want to make sure that you operate this combustion in a way that maximizes the efficiency of combustion. What does that mean? That means that the fuel is fired, there is a lot of energy that is locked into the fuel. When we release this and transfer it to generate power, are we maximizing the transfer of power from the fuel to this to the application at hand, steam, and via that to the power generation? Are we maximizing the efficiency of that? Okay, that is a simple objective to have in this application, but I could go slightly more complex as well. I mean, some of you might probably have heard of single-walled carbon nanotubes. Okay, or maybe variants of that, advances in that area of carbon nanotubes. Now, typically these are also combustion based processes. They also sometimes use precursors in the flame to generate nanoparticles of various morphologies and various sizes. Now, if you're looking at monitoring this application, there is a particular way that you want to run this aerosol reactor or a spray aerosol reactor, or maybe any of the carbon black applications. You find that in, for instance, Aditya Birla's carbon black business or Cabot carbon black business. So in all of these applications, depending on what your objective is, it could be a simple thing like a boiler application, it could be a reactor application, it could be, combustion can play a role there. And you want to maximize the efficiency of that combustion in a way that relates to your end objective. Okay. Let's come back to the simpler application of power generation. So combustion for power generation. So there is a boiler that's driven by this furnace, if you will, where flame is generated and then it impinges. Now you want to make sure that you get a high efficiency combustion. To be able to do that, there are several sources of information. Most important, but the least used, okay, is a combustion system model, which I show you here. Okay, this combustion system model can be as rigorous and as complex as you want it to be. Okay, you can model the reactions, you can model the effect of pressure. You can, there's something called pressure-induced oscillations in the flame. You can do all of that in a very, very rigorous manner, different levels of rigor that. Okay, that is one primary source of knowledge, but it's least used because process is not so well understood. It is basically a very fast process, and so being able to solve these models in real time and the issues associated with it. It could be used for design, for example, but maybe not as much for operation. Okay. Then you have sensors. So one source of knowledge is the model, the physics. The second source of information are this galaxy of sensors. You have fuel quality sensors. This is basically taking a sample, running a uh, uh, calorific value and ultimate proximity analysis of that, and generate an estimate of what the fuel quality is. When a flame burns, it generates a frequency sound like you might have seen when you turn on your cooking stove gas. Okay? It burns, it produces the combustion process produces a sound. Acoustic sensors can measure the frequency. You can have thermal sensors in the ambience of this flame to measure the thermal profiles. You can actually put flame a camera, a thermally shielded camera, and to measure the flame images. You can look at emissions, how well the fuel is burning, what is the composition of the flue gases that exit. You could use all of them. This is just a representative set of sensors that you can have. Okay? And now what you want to be able to do is use this combustion system model and this plethora of sensors that you can deploy in ways that maximize the combustion efficiency. Okay. So what is the first thing that you would do? And let's talk about it from the perspective of the design is there, and there is a operator who basically runs this combustion unit to generate power. Now what they would do is they would cull together all the information related to these measurements. And this is where the first step ML comes in. Okay. You take all of this data together, combine them into, let's say, a data matrix or various other forms of um, representing the data. And then what you do is you process that. You basically do a statistical analysis of that data. And when you do this, you get a sense of what is the current combustion quality. So you do a combustion, what's called as a quality assessment. Okay. Now let me delve a little bit into this machine learning algorithm. What it does is when you say quality assessment using data, what it does is it looks at when the combustion operation was the best, when the combustion operation was average, when it was not so good and the like. And basically you set up a benchmark. You say, okay, this is the data that corresponds to the best operation. This is the data that corresponds to average operation. This is what corresponds, and then that corresponds to poor operation. And then what you do is you basically generate a sense of where the combustion is going, and the operator, based on this assessment, might do some primary air staging or the air to fuel ratio or something to basically push the furnace operation as close to the combustion quality assessment. Okay, as close to the best combustion quality. Okay, now this is in the purview of machine learning algorithms. Okay? Now, where does cognitive reasoning come in terms of the use of artificial intelligence? Things like fuzzy reasoning, neural networks and the like. Okay? So there are limits to what machine learning algorithms can do in terms of statistical processing. So you need to go beyond the realm of what the spectrum of ML tools and get into some kind of a reasoning tools. Right? So now, for instance, you see, look at this image. This is the image of a flame. Okay. Now, depending on how the flame burns, the flame can dart, it can shrink, it can appear in variety of colors, it can appear in variety of volumes, and not just one camera. Actually, the camera is placed at 3 different locations. That gives you a sense of the volume as well. Based on the volume, the color, the frequency of shrinking and darting, you generate a sense of what the combustion, how good the combustion is happening, which means it's a color analysis. And in a color analysis, a clean burning flame, for instance, can appear blue. A sooty flame can appear orange. Sooty flames are perhaps more desirable when you produce carbon black or maybe other carbon nanotubes. For combustion processes, you want it to be blue. When you do this analysis, it's basically a fuzzy reasoning because you don't have a crisp. In terms of the primary colors, you need to do a color classification. That is one step where it involves fuzzy reasoning and bringing in the aspect of, uh, you know, how do you characterize something orange? How orange is it? Is it very bright orange? Is it mild orange? Is it red? Okay. Is a flame white? Okay. So making those kind of assessments would essentially bring in tools related to artificial intelligence. Okay. So now that will help you to assess the combustion quality better and be able to make more informed decisions as far as the operator is concerned. Okay. But now what you also want to be able to do is go one step further and exploit the knowledge that's present in your combustion system model. Okay. So in your combustion system model, you have a detailed model about reactions, the air, the kind of primary, secondary air that you want to have. Okay. And bringing in all of this, you want to develop what is now called in AI and ML parlance, or at least in the manufacturing parlance, it's called as a digital twin. So this combustion system model, when tuned with data from all of these, becomes like a twin to your actual operations. And it's a digital twin. It resides on computer and it's a digital twin. Okay. Now what one can do is one can combine the assessment of the combustion quality, bring in the power of computing, and now be able to query that, okay, now if my combustion quality is average and I want to push it as close to the best as possible, what is it that I need to tweak? What is it that I need to modify or change or decide so that I essentially get improved efficiency? And those are several what if studies done on the digital twin using advanced optimization and control algorithms. So this three-way interaction basically results in what's called as a high efficiency combustion. Okay? So here you bring in the power of AI, artificial intelligence, ML, machine learning, and this physics-based model together into what would constitute an augmented intelligence. Okay, and this is something that I feel has a lot of power, uh, especially if you want to improve manufacturing, but also go one step up the product life cycle. You can also talk about product discovery. Okay, when you're looking at aspects related to drug discovery or morphology of a particular particle or any other such decisions you want to make, you are generating a lot of data. You're also writing a physics-based model based on your understanding. Combining these experimental and physics-based information together to be able to, in a iterative manner. Basically, a product life cycle is that you do a number of operations or other experiments at the bench scale. Do that, take that to the pilot scale, take that to the manufacturing scale. Even at the bench scale, there is so much of data that helps you to understand and refine your models, that give you a better design of experiments and give you a more fundamental understanding of what the process is. Take it up, scaling up to the pilot scale. As pilot scale, the scales are different. Some other factors come in, in terms of impacting the end objectives. It, when you analyze that data, carry forward the physics-based information to the pilot scale, but also understand the extraneous factors. It helps you to run your pilot better, and then scaling up to the manufacturing. So at each of those steps, all of these understandings of fusion of your first principles physics as well as the data plays a very important role. And augmented intelligence, I think, would be the next step as you go ahead towards the deployment of these, exploiting this power of these tools. Let me come closer to manufacturing here. In a manufacturing environment, objective is to meet your manufacturing goals. Okay. So here, for instance, I show you what is it that we are staring at. We are staring at something called as a digital tsunami. Okay. See here, there is a trainee and there is an experienced firefighter, and the firefighter is helping the trainee to basically direct the hose so that the fire, you can do the firefighting and bring everything under control. Okay, but in taking this analogy further, what you now have is bits and bytes of data that are coming together in a tsunami form, and you want to make sense of that data to be able to derive better improved practices. And tapping into a data stream is like drinking water from a fire hose pipe. If you stick in a little cup there, that cup will never get filled, right? You need really advanced tools to be able to look at the tsunami of streaming data that comes at you and be able to make sense in real time, for instance, in the combustion application. Okay? So let me take you to this in context of the operation. Let me take you very quickly through one of the associated advances that are happening, which is called digitalization. Okay, basically digitalization has to do with digitizing all the data which the sensors are throwing up. You basically bring this together in a digital form and then use it. What has spurred its growth? Advances in computing, speed, platforms, infrastructure, advances in that, advances in sensing, miniaturing, miniaturizing, low cost. Of course, each of these sensors can now have communication. In fact, people are talking about 5G embedded in sensors, communications, and of course, computing platforms. What impact does it bring in? Connectedness, integration, safety, productivity, and since we are talking about operational context, it is OPEX, operational excellence. Okay, and then when we do this operational excellence, there is huge opportunity to be able to efficiently handle huge amounts of data. Now, in a manufacturing context, when you handle and process huge amounts of data towards decision making, proliferation of that decision requires you to modernize the workflow. And then combining these two, you are basically addressing this objective of operational excellence. Okay? But that is where, with that brief background about digitalization, AI, therefore, augmented, artificial, both, and big data play a very key role in this process. And this is where I will focus most of my attention and present you several scenarios and case studies. Okay. All right. I'll skip this in the interest of time. Maybe just quickly browse through this. What is digitalization? Science and technology based business transformation. Where is science and technology playing a role? It facilitates generation. What does generation mean? Where do you deploy sensors? To generate the right kind of data, you need to be able to deploy sensors at the right places. Now, with advances in sensors, there is a lot more that has occurred. It helps you to, for instance, in one of the falling film or wiped film evaporators, if you think of a wiped film evaporator, it's basically like a cylindrical tube with, there is an internal impeller that essentially keeps a fine film, to evaporate or remove some of the solvents. And a wiped film evaporator, you can actually deploy sensors right on the impeller blades. They become so miniature, and those can actually also relay the temperature values via communicating through Wi-Fi or some other 5G related protocol. Okay, so generation, then science and technology helps in transformation, and of course analysis of data and information to make agile and optimized decisions. And really what has spurred, I already mentioned, advances in sensing technology, advances in computational technology, much more powerful algorithms at our disposal. The 4 V's of data analysis, the 4 V's, actually there are 5: um, volume, veracity. Veracity has to do with the uncertainty present in the data. So volume, veracity, velocity, the speed at which it is coming up, right? And the 4th V is variety. So volume, veracity, variety, and veracity. And then the 5th V is the value that that data brings in. So how do you bring all of this together in what would be called as descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive kind of. So descriptive is basically understanding the process. Diagnostic is to understand what has gone wrong if it has an aberrant operation. Predictive is how do you predict what's going to happen, when is it going to fail. And prescriptive is how do you optimize. You suggest basically different optimization based decisions. So all of these are possible using computational advances, networking and communication, basically 5G, real time, that provides real time analysis, low power consumption, mobile sensors, okay, and the platforms associated with them. But let's not. This is more of the electrical engineering and computer science domain. And of course, related to aspects of digitalization are these protocols, the Internet of Things. When applied in the industrial context, it becomes an industrial Internet of Things going towards Industry 4.0, which are protocols. And then we also have Industry 5.0 and a wish list for Industry 6.0, which basically talks about cyber physical systems and a massive personalization, as you see here, where there is a human hand and a robot that essentially meet. Okay, so again, this is a little boring in terms of digitalization. Let me not. This is more to do with IoT and IIoT, but the connectedness associated with IoT and IIoT essentially brings in some major benefits, but also what's illustrated on this slide. If you can read, this person at the computer suddenly complains that it looks like my house is going to be on fire because the the browsing algorithm, the browsing web browser suddenly began to post a lot of fire extinguisher advertisements to him because the networks, the sensors connected at his home, suddenly because of their connectedness, felt that there is something wrong in the at home, which is going to cause a major fire, and already based on that, the browser is telling him to buy fire extinguishers. Okay, so that's the kind of level of connectedness that can come with IoT and IIoT. But this is all mostly related to digitalization. Let me not spend too much time on this. Let me directly go into what is first artificial intelligence and how do we talk about augmented intelligence. Okay, so what is AI? AI is basically a discovery and purposeful utilization, exploitation of meaningful patterns and information in the data. We have always been doing this in the process control domain. The process control strategies have been effectively utilized for navigating a plant, but this is a raw approach. Can we do more? And therefore, there are new generation approaches for data analytics or AI that focus on leveraging the data to generate information, leveraging the information to generate knowledge, knowledge to wisdom. Basically, I want to show this as a distillation pyramid where you have discrete elements that constitute the data that help you to generate a raw pulse of the system. When we aggregate the data together, it gives you information in terms of signatures and trends. When we organize this information together, it gives you knowledge, which is best operation templates. And when we apply this knowledge, it essentially gives you the wisdom in terms of consistency in best practices. So in an operational context, one of the key messages is listen carefully to your data. But this need not be true only in the operational context. It can be also in various aspects related to discovery to deployment. So discovery, development, demonstration, and deployment. All of those 4 Ds, the data, the fifth D has a very important role to play. Okay? Now, where are we in the AI area? We are generally in a situation which is data rich, but information poor. We have lots of data. It's like, that all around we have lots of data. But we are not making sense of the data. In terms of the size, the volume of the data, we are in the petabytes. In fact, we are in the exabytes. And where do you put that? This is the table. Long time ago, we had kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes. We have hard disks now, terabytes, petabytes, exabytes, 1000 to the power of 6, 1000 to the power of 7, zettabytes and yottabytes. We are somewhere between these two, exabytes and zettabytes, as far as a typical chemical manufacturing archive is concerned. Okay, so how do we generate? So one is the size, but of course the 5 V's that I talked to you about. The nature of the data is very diverse. Okay, you have numbers, you have images, you have acoustics. Okay,
Yeah.
so all of this basically gives you opportunities to leverage mathematical algorithms uh, in a way that helps you to fuse information from all of these data sources and your physics-based knowledge. Okay. Okay, there is some cross. Maybe we request if you can kindly mute.
उस साल में डीपीओ आया हुआ था मास्क ले लीजिए
Yeah, I think Mr. Amir Ali, if you can kindly mute. I think there is a background noise coming. Yeah, or I request the organizer to kindly mute.
Amir, please mute yourself.
I'm sorry, there is a lot of disturbance here. Could you please mute Mr. Amir Ali? Okay, thank you. Yeah. So the question is, how do we generate meaningful interpretation from all of this data, and how do we, in the operational context, derive useful procedures to conduct our industrial practices in a safe and efficient way? Yeah. And so this is what I was talking about some time ago in terms of a product life cycle. This is also where AI and ML can play a very important role. I'm sorry, there is a lot of disturbance here. Please, Mr. Amir Ali, if you can kindly mute yourself. Okay. Lab scale data, basically growing. You have lots of it here, going to pilot scale, going to plant scale. And at each of these stages, you are generating a lot of data. For instance, for catalyst screening, new product grades, you want to establish process conditions, you want to conduct feasibility checks. Okay, so for all of these tasks, there are opportunities to intra-stage learning, that is within each stage, and also inter-stage learning, basically carrying forward data across stages. There are basically opportunities to leverage AI and ML tools. Okay, so this is what we have put here, but let me not. Let me come to the main message of this talk. You need a paradigm shift in the operational context, in the way we make decisions. So listen carefully to your data, interpret the signals into meaningful information, leveraging all of that data, build the knowledge that these information um, provides for you, and then evolve safe, improved, optimal, and compliant. This is perhaps the most important one. And there is no reason to believe that the life of a person operating an aircraft or traveling in an aircraft is any more valuable than the life of a person living close to a manufacturing plant or operating a manufacturing plant. If we can have such compliant procedures in an aircraft or aerospace domain, why don't we have similar things in our chemical manufacturing domain? So this is very important here, and safe, improved, and optimal practices. So after compliance, you want to have optimal, improved. So that's the kind of. So data deluge right now, we have too much of data, we have no wisdom. We want to make sure that we exploit the data from what is called as an archive or a graveyard and try to bring wisdom into it or derive wisdom from it. Do not let data overload. Don't just put in sensors, cause a data overload. Deploy sensors in an optimal way. Look for nuggets in the hay. Do not make more hay. But more importantly, translate the data into actionable information. So let me come now to how do we do augmented intelligence. As I said, there are three sources for improved cause and effect relationships. We have models, first principles physics-based models. We have measurements, a lot of them coming out from the sensors. Now, each of this by themselves is not a complete source of knowledge, because when I have first principles physics-based knowledge, it's not complete. When I have measurements, it's corrupted with noise. But what I want to be able to do is take the best of both. Whatever accurate information I have in the models, whatever accurate information I have in measurements, I want to be able to fuse them. Okay. How do I fuse them? I fuse them based on, for instance, if one of the sources is less accurate, I will rely less on it relative to the other source. So this third bullet point, mismatch, essentially has to quantify what is the accuracy of the model and what's the noise associated with the measurements, which is what we call as mismatch or noise. Okay. And depending on the extent of mismatch uncertainty, measurements can complement knowledge content. Okay. And in the chemical engineering domain, the process systems engineering area, there are broadly, this is not in any way a complete enumeration, but broadly I could say there are 4 classes of how do you look at scenarios of models versus measurements. Okay, for instance, if I have an accurate model, but my measurements are noisy. Okay, I know my physics completely well, but my measurements are noisy. Okay, what I could do is I could do something called data reconciliation, which is basically a very popular and well-researched area in chemical engineering, okay, that fuses modeling information and data to derive better information. I'll spend more time a little later on this. If we have a noisy model, relatively noisy model, means I have partial knowledge about the physics. I also have noisy measurements. There is this huge area of estimation and filtering, an ever-growing area that talks about Kalman filters, advanced variants of these Kalman filters, and the like. Estimation and filtering is also popular in other engineering domains like electrical engineering, signal processing, and the like. So this is another, depending on if both of these are. Okay. Now, if I know models in terms of its structural relationships partially, and I have noisy measurements, I can exploit that structural information into what's called as a gray box model. And I'll explain why it's called gray box model. And I could use these measurements to adapt. And this is something also that is increasingly used in chemical engineering domain. And finally, if neither the model is very certain and neither the measurements are clean, the model uncertainty is high and it's poorly known, noisy measurements, you can go into what is traditionally understood as AI, which is artificial intelligence, which is black box modeling, multivariate statistics, artificial neural networks, fuzzy and AI tools. But having said this, I must also add that modeling is increasingly coming in here. For example, there is now physics-inspired neural networks that complement ANN representations. Likewise, in fuzzy and AI also, there are different ways by which you can bring in the physics. Okay. Now let's delve into each of these in the traditional context of artificial intelligence. Okay. Although I'll show you one example of an augmented intelligence. Okay. Typical objectives you want to reveal a lower dimension latent relationship. In an operational context, you deploy a huge number of sensors. Okay. But what you actually want to do is look at the underlying reduced dimension latent relationships. You want to discover patterns and clusters in the data. For example, if you're operating the combustion efficiency combustion application, a high efficiency combustion versus the average efficiency or a poor efficiency combustion, how do you discover these patterns and clusters in the data? Okay. There are a number of times when you can't, for example, deploy your decisions because you cannot sense the variable at hand. Okay. In that case, you can build what's called as soft sensors, which are like hardware sensors, but they are based on sensor fusion based approaches. Okay. You could, for instance, even if you can measure all of them, but it's noisy, you can generate reduced variance estimates, for instance, if you're doing closed loop control. Okay. Here, when you talk of soft sensors, it could also be from an optimization point of view. Okay. When you're doing fault detection and diagnosis, you could generate predicting models for prognostics, which is predicting in advance, and diagnostics, which is basically once an aberrant operation has occurred, you want to find out what caused that aberrant or abnormal operation. Okay? And you want to do this on a continuous basis. Continuous performance assessment becomes one of the objectives in the manufacturing context. Okay? Let me just pause here because I've been talking for the last 40 minutes. Let me just pause here to get a pulse of what things are, how things are getting in, and if there are any questions, rather than take questions at the end. Are there any questions that any of you would have? Please do ask so that it gives me a sense of whether what I'm saying is meaningful or not.
So, Professor Ravi, it's Deepak here from Department of Chemical Engineering.
Yes, Deepak.
So, first of all, I think it was really great the way my background is not in AI and ML. I work in the area of materials and polymers, but it was really fantastic the way you introduced AI and ML, because now at least it seems familiar to chemical engineers, I would say. So, thank you so much for that. So, my question is, in the beginning, you took an example of this combustion system where we can actually monitor various variables, right? And based on that, essentially, as you talked about that the pyramid going from data to the wisdom, essentially, you talked around that aspect. So, is it reasonable to say that this one sense I got is when we say machine learning, which primarily includes statistical data analysis, and going from machine learning to the fuzzy logic that you talked about, where you enter into AI, the boundary is fairly gray. Because even if I talk about the flame, I can actually digitize it in terms of RGB, put a number, and do a ML sort of a get into that ML domain
Correct.
based on that.
Correct. Correct. Yeah, you're right. You're very right. The fuzzy reasoning can become crisp if you digitize, and if you're able to digitize without any overlap, or if you're able to digitize in a resolved manner. You
Okay.
talked about RGB. It's usually never possible to do that, right? When you get a flame image, when you do an RGB, usually there is an overlap, between some of the pixels. There is
Okay.
some kind of whether ambiguity of whether it clearly belongs to R, G, or B.
Yes,
That RGB itself, based on frequencies, while you have established it, in the look at the spectrum is nebulous in terms of its class boundaries, and so it's never usually possible to make a very crisp reasoning. Okay, for instance, if I just pick up this pen, all of you can see this, versus if I pick up the mobile cover, the extent of blue in both of this is different, right?
Yes.
Now, how do I say which blue and where does it belong? Right. So that's where you start bringing in reasoning that is beyond crisp logic. Okay, it becomes fuzzy logic. Secondly, when you have to compare, when you have to assess, I just glazed through this performance assessment and fault detection and diagnosis. See, a fault or an aberrant operation is the worst case scenario in an operating plant. Okay, or is the ultimate failure of equipment or something. But it can go through different grades of reduced productivity before it eventually fails. Take a pump, for example. When a pump is operating, it starts wobbling first to a limited extent, then it starts wobbling more and more, and eventually the impeller fails, the blades fail. So as it goes through this, it goes through shades of degrading performance, and eventually has a degradation that's not acceptable to us, right? So there is a continuum there, and most real life problems are in terms of classification. They have to deal with a continuum domain where there is no crisp separation between the decisions that the information that you get based on which you can make decisions. And so that's where you need some cognitive advanced reasoning. Fuzzy reasoning is just one of them. Advanced reasoning tools, and that's where AI comes into picture.
That makes sense. Thank you so much.
And you're right. It's actually a very very nebulous transition from machine learning to AI.
But I think what I wanted to get was some sort of a feel, where would you call it once? So I got that answer. Like once you sort of start to learn your fuzzy logic enough that it can become a really crisp data,
Right.
then you can get into, and this is how actually the transition will keep happening and the technology will advance, I guess.
Right. Right. Right.
And actually, just to comment on that, there is a being a a polymer scientist or a chemical engineer, I have worked with the industry. There is a similar, just the way very interestingly you talked about manufacturing of carbon nanotubes or any graphene-based materials, and how one can actually follow all this machine learning analysis to optimize your processes in production.
Right.
There is quite a bit of actually work where we are trying to get in, where one can use actually light scattering to monitor in situ processes, because again the data analysis is very fuzzy.
Yeah.
So just to get into that maturity to call, make some solid decisions.
Sure.
So thank you for giving that inspiration. Actually, thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that gives me a good pulse of how whatever I said is percolating. Thank you for that, Deepak. Let's just go ahead in the interest of time, and let me look at some of the basic challenges in AI data analytics. One is what's called as a design problem. All of this again in the operational context, but also not limited to that. What to measure, how, where do you locate your sensors, how do you transform and visualize the data, how do you remove outliers, nonlinear effects, or if there are nonlinear effects, how do you accommodate them, how to present the data in a form suitable for analysis. All of these are design problems, both at the hardware and software level. And then, of course, you have the analysis problem dealing with size, collinearity, heterogeneity. Heterogeneity, I talked about images, numbers, frequency information. Non-linearities again coming in here. Address uncertainties. For example, I have a low signal to noise ratio, a very noisy measurement. Now, multiple memberships. We talked about resolutions and many more. And of course, mainly complementing modeling knowledge with data according the relative importance depending on their certainties or noise levels. Okay. Let me just go to the general problem now. We have a system. Causes most of the time are deterministic. Again, not necessarily so. Disturbances and drifts on a system. You have an effect that is measured. This is actually the plant. But what you have is an abstraction of the plant where you say causes are deterministic, you have disturbances, and you want to predict the effect of this cause. Most of the time, both from a fault detection diagnosis, from an optimization point of view, from a control point of view, this is what you would like to do. When I say optimization point of view, it is slightly higher in the domain of process systems engineering relative to the plant. Closest to the plant is the control layer. Next to that is an optimization layer. The control layer basically takes a target and drives the plant to that target. The optimization layer basically decides what those targets are. Right? So in both of those cases, you want to be able to look at causes and predict effects so that you're able to drive the plant at its operating point, optimal operating point. You might have challenges associated with non-linearities, dynamics in the data. There could be time varying behavior like a catalyst deactivation or a heat exchanger fouling. Parameter shifts can be there. There could be normal versus abnormal operation. And let's assume that you have all of this data in a simple X matrix, two-dimensional X matrix, although the field has advanced to handle both higher dimensions, tensors, and the like. It has advanced to that level as well. But from an understanding point of view, let's keep things simple. Several classes of relationships, overlaps amongst classes can also be seen, like I just talked about for Deepak's question. You could represent knowledge using white box models, gray box models, and black box models. Okay. What do we mean by that? White is you know the physics completely, right? White representation of the you know the physics completely. Black, you don't know anything about it. Okay. Gray is when you incorporate some amount of the physics and use measurements or the data to basically tune the model. So a gray box is basically a white representation of the exactly known cause and effect relationships, black or empirical representation of the poorly known relationships. And then when you combine these two, you basically can get an improved model. Now, data is needed to different extents of rigor for model building, depending on what you want to do. They want to develop a white box model. Remember, a white box model is white because you know the cause and effect relationships, but you still need to estimate some of the parameters. So data is needed to a relatively lesser rigor there. In a black box, it's needed to much higher level, and gray box somewhere in between. Okay, and that's what I show you on the subsequent slide here. Okay. Here, first principles knowledge goes in a white box model. Data goes in to estimate the parameters of, let's say, a constitutive relationship. For example, distillation column modeling. The constitutive relationship is is what you know from the vapor liquid equilibrium information data, but also you might use some operating data to tune the first principles model. It's a reactor application. While you can predict the kinetics, have a kinetic model, you can also use data to a limited extent to get this white box model in tune with the plant. So this is something that you would call as a white box model. Significant amount of first principles knowledge is available. When I have partial first principles knowledge and I have data, I essentially build what's called as a gray box model. And when I have absolutely no first principles knowledge, I just have data, then it gets into a black box model. So differing extents, data is exploited to be able to build a white box, gray box, or a black box model. Okay. Now, given this background, let us just look at all of those aspects that I presented a few slides ago and start looking at each of these individual problems. First, let's look at what's the data reconciliation problem. Okay. In this data reconciliation problem, you assume that the process model is perfect. Okay. You have raw measurements that are noisy or in error. And what you want to be able to do is respect the physics. Basically, the physics is true. Okay, that's the truth. and you have complete understanding of this truth, what you want to be able to do is take these measurements and correct them with respect to the truth so that you have reconciled measurements. Okay. A case in point is, and this is always a problem when in petroleum refineries or in the LNG business, I'm sorry, or in the upstream and across the domain. So here what you have is, for example, you transfer gas from an upstream production facility to a downstream LNG facility, liquefied natural gas. Okay, at both those places there are sensors, and two sensors will never agree. Okay, so the question is now, what is the amount of gas that has been transferred from one enterprise to the other? Okay, they might get into a conflict because the meter readings are not right. But what is the truth here? Mass balance has to be observed. So F1 is equal to F2. You look at the variance of the sensors and you reconcile what each of these sensor readings are telling you so that the two parties agree saying this amount of gas has been transferred to you, so you need to pay for this kind of a transfer, right? So it assumes that the model constraints are accurate and it reconciles the measurements to the model. This helps you to generate, for instance, when you're doing optimization from what point? From a base point. That current operating point, data reconciliation can help you to do. It can also help you to correct random errors, detect and correct those random errors, account for instance, stream leakages. There is this aspect in water distribution networks called non-revenue water, which basically is a leak. And you want to be able to detect where that leakage is occurring. That's where this would also become quite helpful. Estimation of unmeasured and inaccessible streams. For instance, if you can't have a meter located at a particular point, can we still estimate the flow? This becomes quite useful. There are dynamic variants. You can do dynamic networks, water distribution, gas distribution networks. All of those places, reconciliation meter reconciliation is applied. And this is typically a very useful tool to be able to generate a base case estimate of what's happening. Okay. In fact, it can be shown that some of the advanced estimation and filtering algorithms can actually be cast into a data reconciliation or vice versa. Data reconciliation can be posed as a steady state estimation and filtering problem. Okay. Those also, there are enough literature in that area. Okay. Let's look at the second problem, which is data compression. In data compression, what we have is a lot of measurements, whereas the underlying operation is in a much, much smaller domain. I'll just take a simple example for you. This is a fuel flow versus steam demand. Okay, I have a sensor for how much steam is being demanded and transferred. I have a sensor for how much fuel flow is happening in the furnace application. That combustion problem. Okay. Now I have two sensors, whereas the underlying relationship is just one. When the steam demand increases, the fuel flow should increase. So the feedback loop. That's only a single relationship, but you have two sensors. Okay. So you have an inflated data space, more sensors than what you actually need. You want to get a sense of what is the underlying relationship. Okay, and in this, I'll take this example further to explain where data compression is very helpful. This is under the heading of what's called multivariate monitoring. Okay, so think about the scenario where you have an operator that's sitting at the console, and that operator basically looks at how the steam demand is being changed, how the fuel flow is changing in respect to the steam demand. Okay, and he or she is staring at the operator console. What they typically have are control limits, and I don't know if you can see this very faint green lines here, vertical lines and horizontal lines. The vertical lines are the control limits within which the steam demand must lie. It should not violate those limits. And these horizontal lines are the control limits for the fuel flow. Okay. An operator can just stare at this. And in this simplistic scenario, there are only two variables. In an actual scenario, there could be several hundred variables. It's actually a difficult problem. But just to explain the context, let's look at this two variable problem. Okay. Now, the inference or the instruction that the operator is given is, so long as points lie within these two control limits, So two control charts. So long as the points lie within those, everything is normal. Okay. And the operator very religiously follows that. Okay. Now let's assume that the fuel flow sensor has developed a bias. Okay. And what it does is it begins to throw readings like these. Okay. Now these two readings are within the control limits of the fuel flow and the steam demand. And so the operator might just think that everything is happening normally, whereas actually the fuel flow sensor has developed a bias. The control systems associated with the fuel flow tries to correct that bias and delivers a huge amount of fuel, and it could potentially be a abnormality. Okay, how does one detect this abnormality quickly? Okay, actually in a univariate, if you look at it one variable at a time within these two control limits, you will never be able to detect this abnormality. Okay, whereas if you look at it in a joint sense, in a multivariate sense, what you really have to monitor is this relationship. Okay, and in the simplest sense, that data compression problem becomes a problem of coordinate transformation, where we generate a new set of coordinates, monitoring the relationship. See, this is the relationship. Here, you're just doing a coordinate transformation. You're monitoring the relationship and setting control limits on that relationship. When you do that, these 2 points now show up as an abnormality. Okay, and this is illustrated only for a 2-variable problem, whereas in the plants this has been very successfully applied for several hundreds of variables, and doing a dimensionality reduction to as low as 10. Okay, and monitoring in that lower dimension space helps you to detect faults, diagnose faults, and be able to correct them as you go ahead. Okay, so this is one example of a data compression problem. Now I'll show you a very interesting example of fault detection and diagnosis that is a chemical engineering example that relates or brings together an approximate model and measurements to do the task of fault detection and diagnosis. Okay, let's take this example of an LDPE reactor, a low density polyethylene reactor. As you all can relate, in a LDPE reactor, polymerization is happening. You have monomers of ethylene that get converted to polyethylene. Okay, the operating conditions are typically 150 degrees, very high pressure, 1200 atmospheres, and N is of the order of 10,000. Now, in this reaction, there are certain side reactions that are potentially hazardous. For example, ethylene can decompose to give you carbon and hydrogen, can give you methane and hydrogen. Okay, these are typically explosive in nature. They also involve high exothermicity, and there is an economic loss because not all of the ethylene is getting converted to polyethylene. Okay, now let's think about this, and you want to basically develop optimal operating conditions for operating this LDPE reactor. If I do this, I can use first principles knowledge. Okay, but that first principles knowledge is approximate. Why? Sometimes reaction kinetics are approximate. Specific heat dependence on temperature is approximate. Okay, so let's look at the reactor schematic. There are ethylene flow rates measurements, initiator flow rates, unreacted ethylene product flow rates. All of those, suppose you're able to measure them. Now, the objective is you have to detect the onset of this undesirable side reaction and be able to take corrective measures. Okay, so let's look at an energy balance. When I write an energy balance, this is associated with the heating. This is what leaves. This is what is the aspect associated. Sorry, yeah, the heat of the reaction, input and output. And from an overall energy balance perspective, you want this energy balance to close and should be equal to 0. If it is not equal to 0, it will show you some finite errors. Okay, this is the first principles knowledge. Breaking it down, enthalpies can be written in terms of temperature. Okay, but there is a significant uncertainty associated with this, and so how do we solve this enthalpy balance equation in the presence of uncertainty? Okay, the answer is one of the algorithms for dimensionality reduction called PCA, Principal Components Analysis, that can help in being able to solve meaning solve for this application of detecting this objective of detecting the onset of a side reaction. So how do we do this? We basically rewrite that equation in terms of what is measurable. This is not temperatures, right? All of these are measurable. They open that up in terms of uncertainties, and now lump together what are the alphas which contain the effect of uncertainties, and H, which are the functions of temperature. Okay, and if you know this now, you have this relationship that you want to monitor in a way that helps you to detect when there is a runaway reaction. Okay, so you perform this PCA or a dimensionality reduction on this matrix H1, H2 up to Hi, which are basically constructed from temperature measurements. Okay, and once you do that, you look at monitoring the error within these bounds. Okay, and you can establish thresholds on this to monitor that everything is right. Anything beyond this is basically a danger of decomposition. Okay? When this is done, this is a exercise done on simulations. When you look at this closure error, it looks something like this. But when you monitor it closely, okay, the energy balance closure was found to violate the safety limits about 3 minutes before the onset of a decomposition. It was able to show that there is a decomposition, and you are able to detect it early by monitoring a digital twin based data monitoring algorithm. See, this is in some sense a digital twin, not exactly, so it's a gray box model, but temperature measurements are augmented to fulfill the task of monitoring the side reactions. Okay. So this is one example of using data and dimensionality reduction. Let me go to the data clustering problem. Now, typically, and I'll just skip this in the interest of time, this is typically used to build classes within data matrix. So given this matrix X, the same two-dimensional matrix, you can solve several problems. Clustering essentially has to do with finding a structure in huge amounts of data, or organizing data objects into groups whose members are similar in some way. For example, genes that behave in a similar way. Okay, as 4 or 5 examples here. When you do regression, you look at data points that obey the same correlation. When you're doing fault detection and diagnosis, you want to discriminate between normal operation and abnormal operation. When you're doing systems biology related studies, you want to identify genes that are responsible for a particular regulatory function or a disease using microarray data. When you're doing identification, you want to look at regions of linear operation. This is an area associated with systems and control. Okay. I'll show you some examples a little later, but the general requirements for clustering, you want to be able to deal with different types of attributes or data forms, discovering clusters with arbitrary shapes. Maybe I'll show you an example of that a little later. No, maybe I don't have that example here, but some data can be, some clusters can be elliptical, some may be spherical, some may be square, and you want to be able to encapsulate those clusters very tightly, otherwise you end up with misclassification, that is assigning a point to a cluster to which it does not belong because of the proximity of the cluster that it belongs to. That misclassification you want to minimize. You want them to be clearly resolved. You want to be able to deal with noise and outliers, high dimensionality, okay? And you want to function with minimal domain knowledge, although there is some, it would help. And you want it to be interpreting and usable. There are several clustering algorithms, hierarchical, which is either agglomerative or divisive. You take one data point, look at the similarity with respect to all other points and agglomerate them and build those clusters gradually, like you have when you do a soot formation or a carbon black formation. It's basically an aggregate. You agglomerate in that manner, or you start with all of the data points at one time and then start breaking it down into individual classes. There could be exclusive clustering, hard clustering, which is does not permit a data point to belong to more than one cluster, or it could be fuzzy clustering, more often the case. Okay, or there could be probabilistic clustering, which is a mixture of Gaussians. Okay, but more of this deep dive would require quite a bit of time, so I will not get into that. Let me just show you one way by which the original data is here, but when I do apply AI tools, what happens, especially in these regions, is a red point can be inadvertently classified as a blue point and vice versa. If they are separated in this manner, then the misclassification becomes reduced. So AI ML tools help you to go from here, transform the data, and take it into a new space where the points are clearly clustered. Okay. Likewise, this is an example of different cancer types, and you can see that when you apply AI tools, you are able to cluster the data. For example, you see the spread here amongst these pink asterisks. They all get consolidated into a single one, and this minimizes any misclassification of other cancer types to this cancer type and the like. Okay? So discrimination and classification is something that is useful there. In a closed loop control context, in a high purity distillation column, the nonlinearity can be classified into 4 separate regions, and you can do advanced control based on that. I'll not spend much time on this. Then we have the data regression problem, the Kalman filtering that I talked about, which appropriately weighs information from measurements as well as models to generate estimates of all of the process states. Okay. There are several advanced variants to this, like an extended Kalman filter, uncentered Kalman filter, particle filters, moving horizon estimators. It's just a growing field in the estimation and filtering area. You could have purely statistical regression, more in the machine learning domain, where, for instance, in a batch process with a finite duration, you want to predict the end quality. You can use this kind of a statistical regression to do those predictions. Here is an example of one such for an antibiotic fermentation that we applied to an industrial facility, which predicts the titer, antibiotic titer, and the duration as a function of time. This is something that we deployed, also helps you to diagnose. Just going a little fast here in the interest of time, because need to also have some time for Q&A. But please feel free to stop me at any time if things are not clear or accumulate questions towards the end. There is this performance assessment and characterization, which is monitoring in terms of keeping the variables in a safe zone, and assessment, which is also doing productivity or performance related assessment. Both of these are very, very eminent candidates for AI and ML tools, promoting operational excellence, bringing together information sources, metrics of performance. Where do you want to optimize? What are the performance metrics? Performance benchmarks amongst these. What are the theoretical benchmarks? What are the statistical benchmarks and the like? And the approaches exploiting digital twins to achieve operational excellence. I already talked about that in the beginning slide. So performance classification has to do with, in this example, if you see, a high productivity at a low energy, right? A high productivity at a low energy is probably the best operation. Okay. Then there are classes which are average and good. What you want to be able to do is go as close to the best as possible. What that means is that if you start with an initial distribution that looks like this, your variation becomes narrower and you go closer to the limit. The mean goes closer to the limit. That is what operational excellence is all about. Okay? Narrowing down the variation and taking it as close to the operating limit as possible. Here is one example of a closed loop performance monitoring for a nitric acid plant. Okay. There was a simple control loop that monitored temperature. This is based on actual operating data of the control loop. The temperature variations were like this, which was considered bad for the catalyst. The performance index, as you can see, relative to the best control performance is of the order of 0.2. So the best is 1, then the control loop is operating at 0.2, which reduces the catalyst life. On retuning, the temperature regulation became tighter. You can see that there is an improvement in the performance index, goes closer to about 0.3, 0.35, and that resulted in 22% increase in the catalyst life. Now you can argue that 0.15, 0.2 versus 0.3, 0.35 is not a big change. Why not go up to 1? This limit was a theoretical. 1 is a theoretical benchmark. Okay, it may not never be achieved in practice. Whereas relative to that theoretical benchmark, even this is good. Okay. If I really want to achieve the theoretical benchmark, then I need to make a change in the plan design. Okay, that's some of the aspects related to monitoring. For closed loop control, sometimes you might want to detect model plant mismatch. So again, there AI and ML tools play. Actually, this is an example more of a ML application where you want to detect mismatch, and this was applied again in the interest of time and go fast. This is a multivariable plant with 7 controlled variables, 3 manipulated variables, a kerosene hydrotreater unit, and based on this was in Canada, Suncor Energy, based on an assessment of the data associated with these variables, uh, one was able to detect in which channel the mismatch was present. For example, this is the schematic of that. And when we did the regular correlations, it showed a number of spurious correlations. Whereas when we did something called partial correlations, it was able to fix them in only 2 such channels. When we corrected them, this service time basically is how long the model predictive controller, which is an automated algorithm, how long that is online. The service factor, essentially the ability to stay online, is dependent on the operator confidence. If the operator is not able to explain why the control algorithm is doing what it is doing, they take it offline. So when we corrected the model plant mismatch, this service factors is improved quite substantially. The operator had more confidence in understanding why the model predictive controller was doing what it was doing. Okay. And then, of course, there is also this aspect of interaction, nonlinearity assessment, which gets into this domain of nonlinear detection in data. Most of the statistics, for example, machine learning and the like, are based on an inherent assumption, although not quite, an inherent assumption that some of the metrics are linear. Okay, but when you have nonlinearities, you need to go into high order statistics, such as coherence, bicoherence, spectrum, and bispectrum and the like, non-Gaussian, to identify non-Gaussian behavior and the like. Here is one such example of how bicoherence can detect the presence of nonlinearities in the data and correct for control valve stiction and the like. Okay? So this is really what is this power of the tools. Likewise, you could look at interaction detection. Now, this is a chemical engineering example where you have a large plant and you can have a centralized controller that makes decisions for all of the units. But then sometimes this is a risk because the centralized decision, if it fails, then there could be a problem. Also, the size of the problem becomes very large when you're looking at an fluidized catalytic cracking unit. So what they do is they break it up into maybe the reactor regenerator and the gas plant as 2 separate controllers, or you can break it up even further into reactor and the regenerator and the like. And if you want to do this, if you decentralize this, then you end up in a problem of identifying the interactions between these 2 or this and this. And that's not a trivial problem. Again, there, we found that some of these advanced AI and ML tools helped. Where this problem can become serious, is if some of you might have heard, eastern side of US actually had a power outage, US and Canada, because there were 3 power grids, and those power grids made independent decisions, and there was no coordination between them. Okay. The interactions, though, were present, and so collectively the power grid failed. All those 3 power grids failed because they didn't make a coordinated decision. This becomes a very useful problem if you're able to detect the interactions and therefore make more stable and coordinated decisions. So that's an important problem in large-scale system optimization control. So this is where I had to kind of end. engineering problems of challenge, combustion monitoring, we talked about environmental systems, sustainability, now if you're talking of air quality monitoring, emissions, carbon credits and the like, identification of blind sources. See, the source of the emissions are very, very distributed and blind. But what we measure as air quality, maybe a kilometer or 2 kilometers in the environment, is an aggregation of all of that. How do you break them up into blind? The sources, identification of the sources, it's a challenging problem. Patient health monitoring, okay. Several issues related to social and related to, we have applied this, for example, in osteoporosis. If you want to detect osteoporosis in women, you want to have a non-invasive sensing mechanism that predicts how the osteoporosis is progressing and the like. There also AI and ML tools come quite handy. Engine health monitoring, for example, it's mostly in the frequency domain. There is non-stationarity where regular statistics fail. Those could be important problems. And causality detection and pulse. So which is the cause and which is the effect? In a feedback system, sometimes it becomes hard to identify whether it is the cause, what you think as a cause that has led to an effect, or the feedback of the effect that comes back and leads to initiating the cause. What has caused the problem? Again, that's a difficult problem. Causality detection and process systems for improved diagnosis. These are some of the engineering problems in data analytics as far as chemical engineers are concerned. Okay. I'll just stop there in the interest of time, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have two questions. One is very general, in the sense like we as a chemical engineer from our graduation days talk of control, feedback control, and all those stuff. So basically, we were trained to deal with AI problems. So why there is so much a boom in recent times? That is a very general question. And to be and one more specific question about this combustion problem. So I work in the area of fire science from both from a safety point of view as well as from a process, understanding the dynamics of explosions and fires. So how do you think AI can help?
Okay. Okay. So let me take the first question. The first question is associated with process control. And yes, we've been doing this for maybe 4 or 5 decades, at least in process plants. And what is it new and why is this explosion grown? Okay. So the quality of, first of all, there are limits to control performance achieved by a simple feedback controller. And you need to be able to do a lot more to be able to, look at an enterprise-wide level. See, a process controller at the most fundamental level is a simple feedback loop like a temperature control or a flow control. Okay, but in the context of an overall plant, this is just a speck or a dot. Okay, there are several such control loops. Okay, you could bring them together in the context of different multivariable controllers that set targets to the local control loops. But again, these are, instead of having 1,000 control loops, this brings it down to maybe 50 multivariable controllers. Now, even these multivariable controllers need to interact with each other to basically the paradigm that they have to keep in mind is think about a global objective function, an enterprise-wide objective function, but act locally. So think globally, but act locally. And so whatever decisions is done at the most fundamental feedback control problem is based on targets that are posed by higher levels of decision making, okay, that get cascaded down, and the control loop that way is fairly myopic in its view as well as its horizon. View because it's looking only at its local variable, and in terms of horizon, it's basically eliminating any disturbances of the order of minutes. Okay, when you have to do decision making that promotes the overall global enterprise objectives, That's where you need to start worrying about how do controllers interact with each other. Can they coordinate themselves so that the overall enterprise performance objective, be it profit, is maximized, but primarily safety. Okay? In an aircraft, for example, there are several control loops, but the pilot, when he or she is flying the aircraft, there is a pushback from the control system to the pilot as well. If the pilot asks for a roll rate that is more than what is safe, okay, in a commercial airliner, okay. So safety is the first objective, then comes performance, and then comes, into performance in terms of profit and the like, okay. So you want to make sure that the control loops perform in such a way that they align with the global objective and keep everything safe. That's a non-trivial problem. Okay? And you have to make sure that to be able to deploy those advanced decision making, you have to have a thorough understanding of the cause and effect relationships. In the combustion example, I talked about a combustion system model. It's basically a digital twin that you query at an extremely rapid rate to predict the effects and then come up with optimal targets to the lower levels so that you're able to improve the overall safety and productivity of the system. Okay, that's my response to the first question. Have I answered that question?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the second question is related to in the combustion example. And can you please repeat that question?
Yeah, so actually, I'm working in this fire safety and fire processing, fire dynamics problem. So where do you think is actually this AI can come into picture?
Yeah, so fire safety, basically, what you are really doing is distributed monitoring of various infrastructure that you have to ensure that all of those become or operate in a manner that is extremely safe. Okay, so not only do they operate in an extremely safe manner, what you want to be able to do is predict in advance what is potentially unsafe. That is comes under the domain of prognostics. Okay, you want to be able to act much ahead in time rather and prevent something from occurring in an unsafe manner, like the reactor example that I showed you. Okay, there what is required is discrimination between signals in such a way that as soon as two signals become unalike, what are the two signals? I have a template of safe operation and I have a current operation feature. I compare these two. And so as soon as it deviates from the template, I know that there is something wrong. I need to be able to detect this as early as possible to initiate a remedial action. Okay. There it becomes a problem of prognostics. Now, unfortunately, if I am not able to do that and an aberrant event occurs, I need to be able to delve into the data and see what has caused that aberrant operation and make sure that that uh, problem in the design or the absence of a feedback mechanism is corrected. That is what's called as a diagnostics application. Okay. If you are talking of fire quality, we're actually generating a fire for the combustion application. You want to make sure that those energies related aspects, efficiencies, and all are maximized. So at all of these points, AI and ML does play a role. It really is objective driven. If you can list what are the objectives in your fire safety application, you can come up with appropriate tools in AI and ML that map to meeting those objectives.
Thank you.
Have I answered your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I see a question from Chris Tomsile here. How does AI help in predictive maintenance and how could it be implemented in a large scale in industries to curb downtime issues? Very good question, Chris. Uh, for example, I can talk about an application in an oil field where they use this submersible pumps. Okay, and there the environment is extremely harsh. It has to pump out the oil, which is a very viscous medium. There is oil, sand, and grit, and everything that comes out, and the pumps frequently fail. Okay. Now, what you want to be able to do is, suppose there are some, let's say, hundreds of thousands of pumps deployed in various oil fields. You want to be able to monitor the health of those rotary equipment in real time there is also a mean cycle time between failure that you want them to, adhere to. There is also this health related aspect. For instance, suddenly a pump can develop, because of the environment it is in, it could develop some health related, failure related, start showing some failure related signatures. Can you detect this early so that you are able to initiate? How severe is that? First of all, a quantification of how severe is that. Can you flog a pump to operate to a greater extent beyond which it needs to be taken up for overhaul? This is a very dicey decision actually. Flogging a pump when it shows a relatively less severe signature versus when it eventually grows to a more severe signature. But suppose you're able to make that dicey decision and extend the lifetime of a pump till you want to take it for overhaul, this becomes a decision of data analytics, predictive maintenance, augmented with an optimization decision, because you have several thousands of pumps, and which one do you want to keep operating and which one do you want to take for overall as a predictive maintenance so that they don't fail when you deploy them back again, anticipating a huge surge in the oil demand, for example. Okay, so over a particular time frame, if you have, let's say, a bunch of, let's say, n pumps that are operating, and let's say m number of pumps are under overhaul. Okay, suppose there is a surge in demand and you are able to predict that demand in advance and you are looking at the current health of the operating pumps. Can you say that, okay, of these n operating pumps, I want to move some of them for overall in anticipation that I want to have n plus some quantity of pumps and more number of pumps operating to meet that higher demand? Those kind of decisions can be made in real time by predictive maintenance, monitoring the health of the pump, and be able to deploy the right number of pumps as the optimizer suggests to meet the surge in the demand. So there are several ways in which AI and ML can help in detecting the signatures that come from the pump, right, and be able to make sense of what the health of the pump is, what is its mean, where it is in the meantime between failure, how much more useful time it has, how much can you extend its duration, can you not, can you take it for overall right now in anticipation of a future demand? All those kind of decisions you can make when you're using AI and ML tools. Chris, have I answered your question? Okay, thank you. Yeah, there is another question. I'm sorry, which softwares are used for building AI ML tools? Oh, I mean, there are so many out there, and Python now has a toolbox. In MATLAB, there are some advanced tools. There are just a whole lot of them. That's probably a separate workshop that I can have where I can walk you through those models, those tools, which can help you to build this AI and ML models. It again depends on what these are based on: pure data, first principles physics. What all can you bring together so that you're able to build those models? Okay. Any other questions, please? I saw one other question. Can you throw some light on in the field of fluid dynamics? Okay. Yeah. See, QFD, CFD rather. CFD is a computationally intensive, and I would say more in the domain of first principles physics, modeling the transport mechanisms, the flow behavior, and all of that. And it is an extremely rigorous model if I want to use this for making decisions in real time. But the question is, can I? Because solving those CFD models becomes a very daunting exercise. So, in fact, I can narrate to you one of my PhD students who worked in the area of fuel cells. Okay, now he developed an application, rather a model based on CFD for predicting how the concentration of oxygen and hydrogen in a fuel cell vary with respect to time, what is the extent of moisture or the hydration in the membranes, which are typically useful parameters when you are looking at the power density. Okay. Now, from a control point of view, while the CFD tools are, the models are very good, from a design point of view, they typically, for instance, even to solve over a 1 centimeter length, his CFD application took about 8 hours. And it's practically not possible to do this for control purposes. So what he did was he developed several perturbations of those CFD models and developed a planned proxy, okay, which is a simplified reduced order model of the CFDs. And those planned proxies can be based on AI and ML based approaches. They can be built based on AI and ML approaches. And those planned proxies can be the basis for your controller system design because they can be solved fast in real time. So one example of where CFD can be approximated into a reduced order model for the uses of maybe optimization and control is one example that I can show you where AI and ML has worked. Likewise, you could think of, depending on your objectives, you could think of several such examples. For instance, in the boiler example, what is the temperature distribution across the furnace that helps you to do design changes, but more importantly, even operation changes. Air stages, for example, where do you locate your burners? Okay, can you change the burner angle? Not that it is done in real time because in an operating environment, but at least it provides you an indication of all of those when you do the mapping of based on AI and ML tools. So all of those are potential applications. Let me see, downtime issues I addressed, fluid dynamics I addressed. Yeah, I think I don't see any question posted, but are there any questions that anybody would like to ask?
So Professor Ravi, this is Deepak again from Chemical
Yes,
Engineering.
Yeah.
So just a quick question. You talked about an example of nitric acid production where via fine-tuning of the temperature controls, there was some improvement done for the performance index as output.
Which was the
Okay.
catalyst life? Which was the catalyst life?
Okay, okay, that is, so it was the catalyst life that was improved as a first principle. Okay. So it was, so there was no hardware change overall in the whole process control. It was primarily the material change, or not the material change, the material.
Not even the material change. See, temperature swings affected the catalyst in terms of sintering.
Quality. Got it.
Temperature swings. So when you tuned that controller more tightly, it resulted in reduced temperature swings and an extension of the catalyst life. Now, normally this is not easy to do just by a visual examination. You need to do a data analysis over aggregates and relate it to the downtime of the catalyst sintering, and then make decisions on how tightly to tune this. Right. See, controller tuning, although one might think this is a trivial exercise, it is not as trivial as one can think because if you think about it, a controller design, and this is what you would teach in an undergraduate course also, is basically transfer of variability from a point where it hurts you the most to a point where it hurts you the least. Okay. Now, but it still hurts you, right? When you have to make control decisions, it still hurts you. And how best you are able to make those control decisions are based on the tuning of the controller. If you tune it to be very aggressively, yes, you'll get better performance, but sometimes your valves can fail and so on, because of the rapid actions, aggressive actions. So it's very important to determine what is an optimal tuning that will fulfill the application while also not, compromising on your operational objectives. So that's something that is important decision that is facilitated by this kind of a statistical analysis.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. It was really nice to be able to have this opportunity to interact with all of you at IIT Jodhpur Chemical Engineering. I wish to thank you for this nice opportunity, and yes, I really look forward to be able to visit IIT Jodhpur at some time. Likewise, I would invite all of you to visit IIT Bombay. You now have an ambassador, officially you now have an ambassador of IIT Bombay in your midst, Dr. Abhilasha Maheshwari. So, just ample opportunities for us now to interact. And yeah, please do feel free to, on this AI and ML or in any other matter, If you think I can be of help, I'm happy to establish the connect.
Yes,
Sure.
Professor Goody, very useful talk, and in line with the vision and mission of IIT Jodhpur Department of Chemical Engineering, where we deal with the traditional chemical engineering, and very important part is included is the emerging technologies and demand-driven technologies. And emerging technologies, what plays role is AI, ML in process engineering, in chemical engineering. We have courses on AI in process control. So it's very important from that point of view. Also, I would like to tell that we have got a work order from IOCL on AIML modeling for the heat exchangers and for their 7 refineries from the point of view of predictive maintenance and performance analysis of heat exchangers. So that way this talk is very useful. And our water water technology program, the AIML in water treatment plants, and the wastewater treatment in rural areas. Government has got very big scheme on Jal Jeevan Mission, and AIML can play very important role there.
Right.
So it's very important from point of view of water treatment plant, smart graded water supply grid. The talk has been very useful from that point of view.
Thank
I
you.
would like to know your comments on particularly digital twin, status of digital twin in our country with respect to chemical engineering, please.
Yeah. So as we talk, there is one exercise I've been involved with an industry that is developing a digital twin. Primarily because, see, I would say that, let me not even say it from a country point of view. Let me say where the state of the art is. Okay. See, a digital twin has been proposed primarily from the industry domain. For instance, the first time I heard about it was by GE for their aerospace domain. But it is not that the digital twin concept was not present in be it process systems, chemical engineering, or other domains. It is just that it's been called a digital twin because models or first principles physics now can be leveraged to a greater extent because of advances in computing infrastructure. See, sometime back, if you let's say a decade back, if I were to solve a very complex dynamic equation in real time, I would say sorry. Polymerization application, I would say sorry. My hardware does not, computing infrastructure does not support it. Not anymore. Okay. So the possibilities of building digital twins is a lot more closer to reality than it was about a decade ago, because the first principles physics can be solved in real time, and the parameters associated with those first principles physics can also be estimated using advances in estimation theory. You can build those models in real time relatively quickly. Okay. Now, this is, when I say closer to reality, why am I not saying it is reality? Because it depends on the complexity of the application. Okay. In a flame application, the one that I presented, the combustion phenomena is so complex and the reactions are so complex and fast. And the radical generation, the heat generation, it's so fast that I'm not confident that I can solve it in a matter of second or fraction of seconds, which is what I need to control the darting of a flame or a shrinking of a flame. I need to make very rapid decisions. Okay. Now, for that complex application, what I could do is what I presented to you in the fuel cell related matter, that I could model the first principle physics, but my digital twin would be a reduced order model that approximates from the first principles model, and its parameters are tuned to agree with the plant operation in a relatively narrow domain. And that's what I will work with till my computing infrastructure grows to such an extent. I'll be able to solve maybe parallel computing, and it becomes cheap also, that I can deploy it for this flame application. right? So the answer to your question is yes, there it is to a good extent a reality because industries now want it, digital twins, and a lot of industries are now asking for digital twins. In fact, right from a boiler example also, we are working with another company to look at how do we develop a digital twin for a boiler application, not the flame, but the boiler side, the application side. So my answer to your question is yes, it can, to a reduced level of rigor, digital twin can become a reality and you can refine it as your computing infrastructure and your ability to develop better understanding of the process, the physics improves, you can improve that the quality of the digital twin. It's certainly possible to do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Goody. Thanks. Over to Dr. Nirmalya.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Goody. It was really nice and engrossing topic, and we really enjoyed it. I mean, it's not my topic, but I really like the idea of, so for example, I personally work on polymerization and stuff like that. So therefore those examples were very relevant and I could really understand what goes in there. And like you said, sometimes it's not necessary to solve the entire process. You might want to work with a reduced process and stuff like that. But with the increase in computation facilities, like as you said, the time has changed. So when we're starting with different kind of like work scale, like kilobyte, now we are working in megabytes or terabytes. Eventually, maybe we'll go even faster with these 5G connections and all that. So yeah, I mean, I really like the talk, and I hope our all students enjoyed this talk, and this will encourage them to get into this kind of problems and solve this kind of problems in future.
Sure.
So with this, I would like to end this session.
Yeah.
It was really nice, and it's always nice to get back to our professors from our alma mater. So
Thank you.
to be really honest, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
So
yeah, I mean, I must say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. While I mentioned Abhilasha, she's a recent ambassador. We have several other ambassadors as well.
yeah. In fact, Professor Tiwari is also from IIT Bombay.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm glad to
Yeah,
know
yeah.
that. Oh, very nice.
Thank you. Thank you.
Which year?
Yeah.
Which department did you graduate from?
Chemical engineering. I did PhD from IIT Bombay, chemical engineering.
Oh,
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Professor Raja Rao those days.
I
Yeah.
was an undergraduate in 85,
Yeah.
then MTech in 87 from
Yeah.
IIT Bombay. And
Yeah.
then I came back in 95.
So I was there around that time in H1. Yeah.
Okay. Nice to know.
Yeah.
Very nice to know.
Sure. Right.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you very much. Pleasure. Thank you very much. And I look forward to continued interactions.
Sure. Right. Thank you.
Bye.